For as long as he could remember, Amd's life was rooted in the teachings of Islam. Raised in a devout family, faith wasn't just a ritual, it was the foundation of everything he knew. From his earliest memories, the call to prayer echoed through his home like a heartbeat. 5 times a day, he would bow in submission, reciting the verses of the Quran with reverence. The mosque was more than a place of worship. It was his sanctuary, his anchor in a fast-moving world. He believed with certainty that if he followed the path faithfully praying, fasting, living a life of obedience, he would find eternal peace with Allah. Amd studied theology, memorized surahs, debated Christian theology with precision, and believed that salvation was something to be earned, a scale of deeds weighed on the day of judgment. But one ordinary afternoon, everything changed. What began as a small discomfort in his chest quickly escalated into something far more severe. He ignored it at first. A little indigestion, he thought. But by nightfall, he was in an emergency room, surrounded by doctors with concerned expressions. A massive heart attack. At his age, it didn't make sense. He was healthy, disciplined, and spiritually committed. As machines beeped and nurses hurried around him, Ahmed felt his breath grow shallow. Darkness crept in, and the weight on his chest became unbearable. In a desperate whisper, he repeated the Shahada, the Islamic declaration of faith, over and over again. Then, silence. He thought it was the end, but what came next wasn't oblivion. It was something far stranger, a deep, peaceful stillness. He wasn't in pain anymore. In fact, he wasn't in his body. He was hovering above the hospital bed, watching the scene unfold from above. His body lay there, but he was somewhere else, somewhere between life and whatever comes after. And in that suspended moment, something or someone was waiting for him. Hovering above his own body, Amd should have panicked, but he didn't. There was no fear, no pain, just a stillness, pure and vast. Below him, the machines beeped in chaos. Doctors worked frantically, and his brother gripped a chair in silence. Yet all of it felt distant, like a world he was slowly slipping away from. Then, something changed. From beyond the edge of the hospital room, a light began to appear. It wasn't the harsh glare of fluorescent bulbs or the sterile shine of hospital equipment. This light was different. It pulsed softly, like a heartbeat of its own. It radiated warmth, not the kind that heats the skin, but a deeper, soul-level warmth that wrapped around him like a blanket. It wasn't just light, it was presence. A living, breathing, beckoning presence. Amd felt it not with his eyes, but with his entire being. The light didn't speak in words, but it communicated something unmistakable. Come. It was an invitation. Not a demand, not a command, but a tender call that reached deep into the core of his existence. Every instinct told him to resist, to cling to the familiar, to the world he had always known. But the pull was too strong. Not forceful, just certain. With each passing second, the world he had known began to dissolve. The sounds of machines faded, the weight of fear evaporated, and the only thing that remained was that light. He felt himself moving toward it, not walking, not flying, but drawn. As he neared, the light grew brighter, yet it never hurt to look at. It was peace. It was purpose. It was love. Not the love of man, but something purer, something holy. And in that radiant glow, for the first time in his life, Amd felt completely known. Every part of him, his questions, his fears, his devotion, and even his doubt was laid bare before the light. But instead of judgment, he felt a welcome. Something or someone was waiting within that light. And Amd was about to find out who. As Ahmed moved deeper into the light, it became more than just brightness. It became a presence. And then, from the heart of that light, someone stepped forward. A figure, radiant yet gentle, with eyes that saw everything. Everything Ahmed was. Everything he'd ever done. But there was no judgment in those eyes. Only love. A love so pure, it pierced through every defense, every layer of pride, doubt, and fear. "I am Jesus," the figure said. And with those 3 words, Ahmed's world turned upside down. His first instinct was disbelief. He had always honored Jesus as a prophet, a respected figure, yes, but human like all the rest. The idea that Jesus could be the Son of God had always seemed blasphemous until now, because this wasn't imagination, this wasn't a dream, this was real, and standing in front of him wasn't just a prophet. It was the embodiment of something far greater. Ahmed tried to speak, to ask how this could be, but instead of words, visions filled the space around him. He saw Jesus healing the sick, touching the blind, raising the dead. He saw scenes from Scripture, some he recognized, some completely new. He saw the garden, the cross, the empty tomb, and in each moment, he saw not just power, but sacrifice and unimaginable love. Ahmed had spent his entire life believing salvation came through deeds, that his worth before God depended on how much good he could do. But here, Jesus was showing him something radically different. Salvation wasn't earned, it was given. It wasn't about trying harder, but about trusting deeper. It was grace. As the visions faded, Ahmed stood silent in the light, overwhelmed. The man he had debated against, the message he had dismissed, was true. Jesus hadn't come to condemn, he had come to rescue. And in that moment, Ahmed's heart broke not in shame, but in awe. Because for the first time, he wasn't just believing something new. He was meeting someone real. When Ahmed opened his eyes, the light was gone, replaced by the harsh fluorescent ceiling of a hospital room. The beeping of machines, the sterile smell, the sting of IVs. He was back, but something deep inside had changed forever. He remembered everything. The light, the presence, the name he never thought he'd believe in, Jesus. Doctors called it a miracle. His brother wept beside his bed, but Ahmed barely spoke. How could he begin to explain something so sacred, so completely outside the bounds of everything he had believed? For days, he kept it quiet. He replayed the vision over and over. Jesus' words, his touch, his eyes full of compassion and truth. But silence couldn't last. One evening, with trembling hands and a heart racing with fear, he told his brother everything. The encounter, the grace, the realization that salvation wasn't something to earn, but a gift to receive. His brother stared at him, stunned, torn between love and disbelief. Ahmed knew what was coming. And he was right. Word spread. Some friends called him lost. Others thought he'd been deceived. Even family members, the ones who had prayed with him since childhood, looked at him with pain and confusion. How could the faithful defender of Islam now claim Jesus was the Son of God? And yet, Ahmed couldn't deny the truth. No matter the rejection, he spoke with love. He didn't argue. He testified. "I didn't find Jesus," he'd say softly. "He found me." Some slammed the door. Others listened with curiosity. A few wept as he spoke. It wasn't an easy path, but it was real. And for Ahmed, that was enough. He had been called to share, not to convince. He now walked in grace, not performance. In peace, not striving. His faith no longer rested on a scale of good and bad, but on the one who had loved him even before he believed. He had returned to the world, but he would never be the same again. Amd knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. But after what he had seen, what he had experienced, silence was no longer an option. He began to speak, not with fire and argument, but with gentleness, honesty, and conviction. He didn't try to tear down his former beliefs. Instead, he spoke of what had changed him: grace, love, and the presence of Jesus that had broken through centuries of tradition and reached his heart. He started small conversations over coffee, quiet talks with friends, heartfelt letters to relatives. Some ignored him, others walked away, but a few listened. The more he shared, the more he realized this wasn't about converting people, but about opening doors, bridging a gap that had long been filled with misunderstanding and fear. He began connecting verses from the Quran to prophecies in the Bible. He showed how Jesus fulfilled promises that many had overlooked. He didn't come as a threat, but as a brother. And slowly, people began to ask questions they'd never dared to ask before. Churches welcomed him. Interfaith groups invited him to speak. Former Muslims reached out in secret, aching to know more. Some cried as they listened to his testimony. Others stood silently, processing truths they'd never considered. Amd never claimed to have all the answers, only the truth that had been revealed to him. He became a bridge, not by compromising either faith, but by holding fast to love. He respected where he came from, but he stood firm in where he was going. He knew the cost and he paid it daily, but he also knew the reward. Lives touched, hearts softened, hope reborn. His journey didn't end at the hospital bed. It was only the beginning. And now, he walks boldly, with a Bible in one hand and compassion in the other. A man transformed by light, a voice once bound by fear, now carrying a message of eternal freedom.